welcome to another TOG Chat. I'm Bob Osborne, principal of the Osborne Group.
Hi, everybody. I'm Laurel McCombs, also with the Osborne Group. So excited to be with you today.
Yeah, so good to see you again, Laurel. This is like a couple weeks we've done chats together, so it's always fun chatting. And today you had mentioned, I think I've experienced this as well. Like we'll be doing a major gift seminar or something like that, and then everyone will, and it'll go well, and then people will raise their hand inevitably and ask the question, and just say, that sounds great, but how do I actually get appointments? How do I actually get people to talk to me? And I usually tell them, that's a whole nother conversation that we have to have. We don't have time to do that today, but we have time today to actually have that conversation and talk a little bit about how we approach that. So let's start with you. When you get posed that question, what's your first thought about it? How do we get appointments? How do we get people who don't want to talk to us to talk to us?
It is. I think it's probably the question that I get asked more than any other question, because whether we're doing a major gift seminar like you mentioned, or just coaching organizations on putting together donor strategy, people say, well, that's all well and good, but they won't return my phone calls. And so, I think my first reaction is always like, well, let's take a step back from this and let's really diagnose this for what it is, because I think there's a couple of different scenarios. I think in some cases, we think people are being far more unresponsive than they actually are. I think there are some times when maybe we aren't as upfront with ourselves as we should be about the attempts, the legitimate attempts we've really made to reach out to people. So I think that's part of it, is being just as brutally honest with yourself as possible to say, did I really just call twice over the last 6 months and I'm frustrated that they didn't call me back, or have I really legitimately given this some effort, right? So I think that's part of it. But I think for a lot of people, they have given it effort, and I think it can be frustrating, especially with prospects that you feel like are kind of quote unquote cold, right? The people you don't know as well. And I mean, those are usually the people who don't call you back, and that's because they're cold, right? And so I think my first piece of advice is always, how do you make them a little warmer, right? So if you have a lot of cold prospects that you're trying to reach out to who won't return your call, this is what we talk about when we talk about being donor centric, right? I mean, putting ourselves in the donor's shoes, and being able to say, well, if I was, Mary Smith sitting at my desk and I get an email or a phone call from someone I don't know, from an organization that I may or may not have given to before, asking me to meet with them, what's my reaction going to be to that? So I think sometimes we don't, as development professionals, we're so busy kind of just crossing things off of our to-do list. We don't always stop to think about how people are responding to the stuff we're putting out to them. So I think that's probably my first piece of advice is just how are you contacting them? What are you saying to them? And I don't know, Bob, if you have thoughts on what should we be saying to people? Because this is a huge issue, right? I mean, I think it starts with just first and foremost, what are we saying to people when we call? And is that something that warrants a response?
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. We don't always think about is this an appealing reason for me to get back to this person with a scary title like major gift officer or director of development or executive director, where I know exactly where this phone call is going. And our job is persuasion, right? Our job is to build a relationship and to move things along, but people don't wake up in the morning wanting to write your organization a check. And so when that feels like that's where we're going, and I'm not there yet, then I am unlikely to return that phone call, particularly if I don't have a relationship with you. So I always try to find appealing reasons, what can I get? How can I get this person engaged with me in a way that they might find interesting? So my first thought of that is always stewardship. like is always, you know, being accountable in some way. So I always try to get whomever I'm talking to, $5 donation, $10 donation, you know, anything that I can eventually kind of come back and let them know that their gift has made a difference in some way. I also like using insider information. Like if you know something that maybe the general public doesn't know, or your organization provides experts in some particular area or some field that is general interest to people, you know, having a conversation with them about that, giving them extra information, reporting to them, something that's mission centric, I think is almost always going to be much more appealing than something that is going to be development centric. Development centric, I avoid, even for organizations that I love. You know, like you can track me down, you can eventually get me, but because I do have a relationship with certain organizations, but as soon as I know that the development people are after me, I do act in a different way, even though I know and I sympathize with and empathize with development officers. It's just not the call that you're gonna be jumping up and down to make, right? And I think the other thing is we find a lot of the time that it's not a useful call, right? Like even if it's you know, even if it is a solicitation of some kind or something that, you know, that's important to the organization that I care about, I don't always feel like it's going to be the best use of my time. I think a lot of times we'll say, well, I know you do good work, I don't need to talk to you. Or, you know, or I will eventually make a gift to this organization, but I'm not going to do it today. And I have a million other things going on right now. So I'm not going to return this call immediately, or I will return this call. And it goes, you know, the way of like email flags, where you fully intend to get back to them, but you just don't. But you meant well, and you meant to eventually get around to it, but it just stays at the bottom of your priority list. So, you know, that's I try to think about what is actually going to appeal to this donor, what is going to make this person actually want to call me back. You know, Go ahead.
It's funny that you mentioned updates, because I think a lot of people use that, like, but I like how you framed it. So when you said it, you framed it as insider information, right? Not updates. And I think a lot of times organizations will call and say, oh, I want to update you on what's going on with the organization. And I get to your point, like I have 50 million other things to do today. I may or may not be there with you, where I'm so excited about what you're doing that just hearing an update is interesting for me. And so even if the purpose of my call is to give you an update, how do we frame that in a way that creates urgency, to your point about like not having it go to the yeah, I'll do this someday pile. So how do we frame this? How do you frame those updates in a way that makes them feel urgent and relevant? And then how do we make them about the donor? So, you know, even if you were to say, oh, I want to update you, at least say something like, I know you really care about blah, blah, blah program because it's in the neighborhood where your office is. We have some really important stuff that just popped up last week about that program that I know you'd really want to hear, right? Like that sounds so different than calling somebody and saying, I want to update you on the organization. And so I think part of why that doesn't happen is because we don't know our donors very well, right? It's kind of a catch-22. If I can't get them on the phone, then I can't ask them questions and I can't get to know them, and then I don't know what's important to them. I mean, I get that it's kind of a vicious circle, but I think as much as you can, at least, you know, your point about stewardship, like even if they've only given us $5, can we at least see like where their address is? Like if we're making a big enough effort that we're actually reaching out to this person to call them, let's take 5 minutes to figure out something about them that we can personalize the call around. So I think that's the other thing is, I think you also mentioned, I don't want to miss this point, like you also mentioned kind of what's the purpose of the call. And that's the other thing I think most people aren't thinking ahead toward, which is, why am I trying to get this person on the phone anyway? And if it's to get a visit, why am I trying to get a visit with them, right? So it kind of all goes back to this bigger issue of a lot of times donors don't know why it is we're calling them. The fact of the matter is, I think half the time we don't know either. And so,
I couldn't agree more.
right? So if we can be better at doing kind of just prep for why is it that we want to meet with this donor, what would the outcomes of a visit with this donor be, and then work our way backward from that, I think it will make our calls to get those visits far more effective.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I mean, I think when we ask for these calls, right, we don't often mention, we're afraid to mention that we want to solicit them if that's what we're doing, and we don't want to scare them off, and if we're just cultivating, we don't always know how to talk about what that means. We know in our heads we're cultivating, but to your point, we haven't necessarily thought through, like, well, what is the purpose of this particular meeting that I would like to get? I mean, and we mean, not just I eventually want to get money and update you and kind of feel you out about me eventually you giving me money, but more, again, to your point about being donor centric, what does this person need to hear, experience, know about the organization that would be appealing to them, that would appeal to the things that they care about, that would also move them closer to a gift from our perspective. But what's going to be interesting for them, and not interesting in the sense of like sort of general interest, but interesting in, in terms of our mission delivery, what are they going to, what's going to engage them with us, and what are they going to want to hear about? So I think you're right. We don't always think it through, and it does point to having a good strategy. But what should we do? Let's say we have a good strategy. We know exactly what we want, and we're leaving messages. It's really important. We're having a campaign, or we're doing a big push of some kind. We really, really need to have a conversation with this person. What do we do if we're just not getting any traction?
Yeah, I think if you've checked off the boxes, you've checked in and you've said, okay, it's not me. I really am doing what I should do. It's not that I'm not prepared and I don't know why. I know why I want to visit with them. I know what to do. I think that the next thing to diagnose and to kind of triage and look at is, am I just not the right person to be contacting them, right? I mean, no offense to the lovely, wonderful people out there doing development, and you and I are two of them. Sometimes we're just not the people that our prospects want to talk to, and it's not because they don't think we're nice. It's because, again, I've got 50 million things to do today, and I have 50 million people calling me. I'm going to prioritize not just the things, right? I'm going to prioritize the people. And so I think thinking about, and again, this takes work up front, but it's also, I was talking to somebody the other day and I was like, hey, well, have you done peer screening with your board? Because they had a set of these prospects that they just couldn't get in touch with. And I said, oh, have you put these names in front of your board? And they're like, oh, like kind of did the like, oh, Laurel, that sounds like so much work kind of sigh, right? And I said, but you're spending time picking up the phone and sending emails over and over and over again and being frustrated. Like, that's time. And I always go back to the Carlos Castaneda quote that, you can either make yourself happy or miserable, the amount of work is the same. And I just say, yeah, it takes work to go take a list of 10 prospects to your board and have them go through and tell you who they know, and then follow up with the board and say, hey, can you call this person for me, or could you send an email letting them know I'm going to call? But if that results in progress, then that work is worthwhile, right? So I think this whole idea of natural partners, connectors, who are those people? And hopefully it's your board, maybe it's some other volunteer core, some other group, maybe it's other donors, other, really close high level donors that you have. But people, even, and it doesn't even have to be, I think we make all these as like board member has to make a phone call. Like, no, just shoot an email over to them and say, I'm going to call. Because even that is going to increase my chances of getting a call back. I mean, ideally they call and say, hey, would you like to meet with me and, talk with me about something? But at a minimum, just send an email saying, hey, my good friend Bob from XYZ organization is going to be calling you next week. This is really important. You really need to take his call. Right?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, I think peer-to-peer I think we all understand how important peer-to-peer is, but my experience is that people don't often use it. And on the other side, I think board members and committee heads don't always see that as part of their job. Mm-hmm. So one, to your point, yeah, get other people involved, get people on your program side involved. I think this is part of what starts to build a culture of philanthropy. And what we mean by a culture of philanthropy is having other people involved with development, because you're very often not going to be the best person to call. People are attached to your organization because of your mission, and they're going to want to hear from the people that are delivering the mission as much as they're going to want to hear from us, and more so, really. But what I find, particularly with prospects that have a board attachment or have some attachment to a peer that's involved with the organization, I'll call them twice, and if I haven't heard back, I'm going to the board chair or the development committee chair or the governance chair or to the friend that introduced them to the organization, and I'm asking them to help me with this call. Like, I don't wait very long to do that. And I really think it's actually, particularly when you're dealing with your board and their contacts, and other board members who are maybe not even calling you back. Like, I get that a lot. I don't know about you, but like, even board members don't always call us back, or do what we want them to do. I go pretty quickly to whoever the appropriate peer on that board is and ask for their help. Because I know that, I'm on boards, and there is a difference between getting a call from the executive director, which I do try to get back to as soon as I can. But honestly, if the chair calls me, I'm probably getting back to them that day, right? Because this is a person who's doing the same thing I'm doing. Like, they have a job, they have work, they, this is something they're doing as a volunteer. And the fact that I've sort of created a need for them to call me, either positively or negatively, I feel some level of obligation to get back to that person, particularly since that may be a person I have to deal with outside of my relationship with the organization. There's a person I'm going to want to maintain a good relationship with, and I think going sooner to our natural partners, I think, is a good way to take care of this.
Yeah, and even better to just create some systems, because I think that part of this is building habits with our board. And so if you even had every month like a running list, right? The minute you do, and this is just an example, everyone's going to be different, but let's say, I do two contacts with no return, they get put on the list, right? And every board meeting, the list gets peer screened, and then we send names out. And it just gets to a point where the board knows that that's the process, right? They know that at the board meeting, we're going to peer screen a list, and I'm probably going to get an email from Laurel 2 days later with a list of 3 or 4 people and a script, right? And a request to have that done within the next 2 weeks. And I think there are a lot of people who are going to push back to your point and say, but I can't get my board to follow through. I can't get my board to do the things I asked them to do. But again, this is about building habits. Yeah, it's going to take a little while. They're not going to do it the first few times, but that doesn't mean you just stop trying. And it takes a lot of time to build habits, right? We were just talking about exercising more before we got on the call today, right? Like, these are things that don't just happen overnight. And especially if you have boards who have been well-intentioned but not active, these are things that take time. And I know a lot of people say, well, I've asked my board for lists and they won't give me lists. Well, stop asking your board for lists and give them lists instead, right? I think if we want our boards to be really productive, we stop asking them to be self-starters and we start giving them really specific assignments. And I think this is a really great tangible thing for board members to do.
No, I think that's a great point. So I don't know about you, but like sort of the last quarter category, it may not be in fact the last category, but the last category for me, uh, I find that people who are building major gift programs and just in a big well screen of some kind or trying to increase their fundraising in some way will inevitably hand, a list of supposed prospective donors to their middle donor person or their major gift officer and say, go cultivate these, here's the list, and of course this list theoretically is a useful list, but you have no actual relationships with any of these people, and they may have no real relationship with the organization at all, and or may have had just like a direct marketing relationship with the organization. So they've received emails, they've received letters, and yet we're still expected to cultivate them. And of course, these are people that are going to be very low percentage in terms of calling us back. So I have some thoughts about what to do about that. But when you think about that, how do we tackle that?
I think this has been the summer of qualification for me. Like, I don't know why. I think too, a lot more people, because of being home and having more time to maybe pay attention to things that we didn't pay attention to before. I think I've been talking to people a lot the last few months about qualification and how important that is. I think for me, that's probably where I would start is, do we have a good system for qualifying people beyond capacity? So do we have a good way of with quickly and easily, without doing a ton of in-depth research, do we have ways to quickly kind of qualify someone's inclination to not just give philanthropically, but to give to us? And then do we have a sense of, do we have a way to really quickly qualify readiness, right? Where they are, on that scale of 0 to 5 or whatever it might be, do they have any relationship with us, and how close might they be to making a gift? And I think that first and foremost, just being able to prioritize from that standpoint, I think would save a ton of people time, because you at least would look beyond capacity to look at inclination in terms of where to start with going down the list. But I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so for me, I think it's always important cold calls are cold calls, and they're cold calls. And so to me, the way I think about it is like, how can I turn this cold call into something that's not a cold call? And I think a lot of times that is, particularly when you have like a long list, as opposed to like, I want to reach this one person. I think that's one thing. When you have 200 people that you need to be cultivating and they're all cold, then I start thinking about, well, what does my program look like? Like, what kinds of things can I do that will move this person from being someone I have no relationship with to someone that I at least chatted with at an event, or they attended something, or they, I had some other interaction with them. And so I think really thinking through and having enough things on the calendar, either events, and in these days of the pandemic, virtual events, what can I do so that when I call, I feel familiar, even if they've never talked to me or only talked to me once. So I think I'll do a lot of updates, and let people know again what's going on, and tell them, send out information so that I create a feeling of dynamism and that there's things going on at the organization. I have try to have as many different events and interactions and engagements that are fun and interesting and mission centric that I hope I can entice some part of this list to come to. And then of course I'll be there and I'll make an introduction to myself. And then, so when I make that call, it's not just, the gift officer, from this organization is calling, but it is, Bob's calling from this organization, or at least, or a gift officer from this organization that seems interesting and dynamic is calling. Maybe it'd be worth me returning that call. And so it's not that it will magically transform every person on that list or make every person on the list call you back. But I do think by sort of planning enough interactions that are appealing and mission centric for people to come to and interact, will some percentage of that list will be more inclined to return my call. And so yeah, I don't think it's a magic bullet, but I kind of call it softening the ground. Like it makes it a little easier when it comes to making that cold call.
I love that. And, you know, I think a lot of times we talk a lot at the Osborne group about having a suite of engagement opportunities. And I think a lot of people think about that suite as things that happen after the initial contact, right? But to your point, they need to be things that can happen before. And there is no rule that says our first engagement with a donor has to be a one-on-one visit. There's no rule that says we ever have to have a one-on-one visit with donors, right? I mean, yes, that's a really great, it is the best way to kind of have really strategic conversations with people when you can just have them one-on-one, but some people will never want to meet one-on-one with you, right? I mean, and fair enough, but they may be more than happy to do group meetings or come to events or do, to your point about, you know, being in the middle of the pandemic, I might not want to do a Zoom call like this one-on-one with somebody I don't know that well, but if you invite me to join 5 people and we're going to talk about, and all 5 of us have something in common and you want to get our thoughts on the thing that we all have in common and how that impacts your organization, be something I'm interested in doing. So yeah, I think, yeah, it's both the who else can contact this person, but then to your point, it's the what else can we do to engage this person besides just a out of nowhere kind of one-on-one conversation. I love it.
Yeah, well, I think we've covered this topic pretty well, and again, there's no magic bullet to this. I mean, development is hard sometimes, and it's hard to get an appointment. And to your point, not everybody wants to talk to us, but hopefully, these are some ideas that can up the percentage and make it a little bit more likely that you're having the conversations that you want to have. So did you have anything else you wanted to add, Laurel?
No, just to say I agree. You said no magic bullets, but it just made us have to keep trying and keep being creative with what we're trying to put out there. So yeah, good luck.
Yeah, good luck to everyone. Well, thanks, Laurel. Always good chatting development with you. We always have to kind of cut ourselves off because we can keep going and just talking about this. But we'll have another conversation in a couple of weeks. But until then, bye-bye.